much. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. That should be it. Get a verbal so you can see my screen.
Looks like it's working.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. As I've been introduced, my name is Ron Hadler. I am with Red Door, and I'm going to talk about iOS 14 and data privacy. Just kind of give you a little bit of things. Just going to talk about those two topics, iOS 14 and data privacy. A little bit about myself. I am a marketing technologist. What that means is that I speak both marketing and IT fluently. A lot of times there is a little bit of friction between IT and marketing. Sometimes I act as a referee between those two groups when we reach out to clients. But I do a lot of architecting of solutions. I'm very involved in the data that flows between platforms, and excited to talk to you guys today about iOS 14 and what's driving the changes there.
What's your favorite ZZ Top song?
Good question. That was definitely the costume there. And yeah.
I mean, can you play Cheap Sunglasses? I mean, it's.
You know, that guitar, unfortunately, is mine and is more of a prop than a habit.
All right. Well, anyway, that's a totally cool outfit. So.
Thank you. My hobbies are cooking and actually just took up pottery during the pandemic.
We got Sammy Hagar and ZZ Top on the line.
Very nice. You're right. So what is the Apple iOS 14.5 update? And this is really when these changes started impacting folks who were using Apple devices. And really the biggest difference is, you know, kind of an opt-out versus an opt-in. And what happened before is that folks had to opt out of being tracked from the mobile apps, and now they have to opt in. And so that was really kind of that big flip, because we are getting roughly a 70% of folks who just stayed in and only 30% who opted out. So pretty good kind of comparison of what we're able to get. Now, these changes affect, you know, tracking, attribution, and personalization, just because the amount of data that we're able to access is diminished. So this should look kind of familiar here. If you look on the right side here and kind of seeing this kind of pop up, and that's really what's going on. And the net of this is that only 16% of iOS users have opted in. So you're talking about a 70% rate coming down to 16%. This is really what's driving the frustration and the problems. Now, it doesn't have, you know, all of this stuff is, you know, kind of this web messaging and stuff too that Apple's forced upon folks. It's just, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like I want any of that in my life. And so that's part of the problem, is that, you know, the wording sounds very scary. Now, what this means for folks who are tracking is that generally what happens is that, you know, Apple has an iPhone identifier for advertiser, IDFA for short. That's the ID that we use to track folks as they move from clicking on an ad to visiting a website to engaging with that website and then doing a conversion, whether that's downloading a PDF, watching a video, or purchasing something through an e-commerce platform.
Hey, Ron, really quick, what was the opt-out rate before?
30% people opted out, 30%.
So 70% retained, and now only 16% is being, okay.
That's correct. Yep. So big, I mean, now globally it's a little bit better at 26%, but you know, I assume that most of us are US based, majority. And yeah, so it's pretty low. We are not adopting. And you know, if we look at this, and I'll talk a little bit about this under data privacy, is that, you know, the rest of the world, specifically, you know, even the European Union, when it has pretty strict data privacy laws, they're a little bit more used to this. They've been kind of dealing with this since 2016, enacted in 2018, the GDPR, and I'll go and explain what that means later, is that they kind of understand this kind of give and take of sharing data. I think in the US, we've had no say in it for so long that giving these tools, we're just like, no, I don't want it. We've had the whole problems with Facebook and the explosion from 2016 with, you know, them just basically giving away everybody's data. So I think we're very, very leery of sharing our data with companies because we don't know how they're going to act. So really, you know, the why Apple did this is that, data privacy or consumer rights when it comes to data privacy is something that is kind of going on. I mentioned the dates of 2016. That's when the European Union's GDPR was enacted. And so really just getting this ability to have some sort of say over rights is why these things are coming about. Because before we didn't, and we had no idea how much data was actually being collected from consumer points. So it's a really good move for consumers. They're feeling better that they have a say in their data that brands and marketers are using, but it's kind of bad for hyper targeting, right? Doing that retargeting, doing that profiling is really kind of what's taking a hit. So as I've mentioned, it's kind of the impacts are really our ability to measure our advertisement. That ability to track a user from ad to conversion is really what's going on. And so, like I said, it's because of that, kind of 16% opt-in rate, we're really kind of flying blind, if you will. Some of the impact of that is that advertisers are starting to shy away from Apple and move more towards targeting folks who are identifying as Android users, because I can still track using the Android operating system in their apps. There are some ways that, folks are, if you have your own app, they're using the, at least for Facebook, using their conversions API to get around some of this limitations put in by Apple. But if somebody doesn't opt in, you can't track at all. So, without having an IDFA, we won't be able to retarget ads to folks who visit a website from an iOS 14 device. So in contrary to that, or in contrast to that, Facebook and Google do have other identifiers. If we have folks logging in, if we have an email address, we can have those as identifiers and not have to use Apple's IDFA in order to track. It's still not as good as what we had with the IDFA, because we understood from kind of soup to nuts of being able to track. The other thing is that, for those who are tracking with their app installs, you're no longer getting demographic breakdowns. So kind of talking into more of the, actions that we can kind of take to do that is that, conversion reporting, that ability to understand somebody who, purchased, downloaded, or filled in a form is really kind of where we're getting hit. And Facebook has been, one of the, biggest impacts because of that, because everybody uses the Facebook app on their phone. So, like most brands, as an agency, Red Door's two biggest checks they write every month are to Google and to Facebook. And so, this is, highly impacting our ability to target accurately or improve or optimize our ads coming through and going through Facebook and Google. So, one of the things is just the time to, conversion is really being affected. So, not only have we stopped tracking, but they've also, Apple, in their wisdom, has reduced the tracking for first-party cookies from anywhere from 7 days down to 24 hours. What this means is that if somebody's coming in on a mobile device, visiting your website, you might see them come to your website, and then based upon who you are and how you do business, might have as little as 24 hours and they're seen as a new visitor. Most of the average you're seeing as 7 days. Still a very, very short window when it comes to kind of cookies there. So that's one of the things that's really impacting, is just regular ability to kind of track users who have been here before, to understand, I've looked at this product, I want to see it again. How can I, get them back to that product they've looked at previously? If it's been over 7 days in an iOS device, you're probably not going to see them. One of the ways that we are kind of taking care of that is we're moving from, what has traditionally been setting cookies on the front end or the front of the website and setting them on the back end. That's called server-side tracking. So we're moving our Google Analytics from the front end to the back end. What that allows us to do is essentially setting cookies from the back end, or a server cookie, which Apple cannot control. That's how we're getting around that kind of 24-hour or 7-day kind of limitation. So kind of, these impacts of what we're doing is that I mentioned this before, is campaign optimization will be less agile, right? So what that means is that because we have such a short time for a turnaround, if you're selling something that's got a long sales cycle, you're not actually going to be able to kind of have that long sales cycle. You're going to kind of constantly see new users. So, this is really means that as we're trying to optimize our campaigns, understand how we get more people down through the funnel, we're going to have less time to do that. And so the problem with that is that we won't necessarily have statistical significance. We won't have enough people going through that process to make optimizations, because it's just not enough people, because the window is closed on us. So one of the ways that we're recommending to kind of do that is conversion modeling. And really what that means is that generally what we've used as a way for tracking is that it's called deterministic, in the sense that we know somebody clicked on an ad, we know somebody came to a website, we know somebody clicked the add to cart button, we know somebody completed a purchase. That's deterministic. I understand every one of that's transactional, if you will. Conversion modeling is probabilistic, which means that we are using things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to determine that we understand maybe somebody clicked on an ad, but that's the last point we have. We understand that we have purchases that were made. So we have maybe number of people clicked on an ad, number of people who purchases. And then these platforms, Google and Facebook, are using probabilistic analysis to say we have a 40% conversion rate or a 20% conversion rate. It's not transactional the way it was before. They're using fancy guessing, if you will, but it is done through machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Ron, is the 7-day tracking to the 24-hour tracking, is that regardless on if you opt in or out, or is that only for those that are not opted in?
That's regardless. That is regardless of opting in or out. Opting in and out has to do with your specific app on the iOS device. So think of Facebook app, or I know that Narissa talked about she has an app. So, as you're doing tracking on those apps, as they are launched on iOS, you're going to get that little fancy window that says, hey, do you want me to track you and know everything that you do within my app? If you don't do that, that's where the kind of opt-in, opt-out is. The 7 day to 24 hour is that I'm on my iOS device, I'm opening a browser, and I'm visiting a website. That's your 24-hour and 7-day windows.
And
Got
is that different than if it were a MacBook or a PC or something like that?
That is, yeah. Again, they are doing on iOS across the kind of board for a lot of that stuff. The Safari on your Mac or your tablets are still iOS, is still down to a 7 to 24 hours. So anywhere you're using like Safari, I could have a Safari on a Windows, and I would be included in that reduced retention time for a cookie.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. We're now at iOS 14.7. That's the latest version of iOS out there. iOS devices are a little bit slower than some other folks to kind of upgrade, but that is coming on. What's coming at us is also iOS 15 will launch sometime this fall. So, what's going on, and they're moving forward. Data privacy is going to continue to go on. This is not a trend. This is not a fad. This is something here to stay. So one of the things that, we also are doing is what's called incrementality. Normally we would, do some sort of attribution modeling to understand who's responsible, who gets credit for, that conversion. And incrementality is a way we're kind of getting around that. What that means is that what we do is we start in an area, if we can break things down by regions, cities, counties, zip codes, depending upon the granularity that you have, and we start incrementing the amount of ads and spends we're doing in those places to understand the impact. So we start increasing our spend for an area within zip codes, and then look at the amount of conversions we're getting. Here again, this is more of a probabilistic determination or directional understanding of how your conversions are doing. It's not transactional where I could follow this nice little dotted line from ad spend to click and conversion. We're doing more like, okay, I increased my spend by $10,000. I, got a 40% conversion rate for people who are on my website and done, and it went up by 18%, so to say. So I'm getting a directional understanding, and that's how we're using incrementality as a way to kind of understand and being able to track. We are, it's a little bit in the dark, but it at least is directional. We're not completely back to the I am spending, I know 50% of my marketing is working, but I'm not sure which 50%. You at least have more information than a guess. The other thing is that, you'll see a lot of references to SCAD. This is, something that Apple has in place, and it's, really, it's really kind of putting everything to kind of last click. So last thing that, a user touched, but it is their way of kind of doing some tracking. This is something that will also improve with iOS 15. A lot of the way that Apple is positioning all of these changes is that, they're being altruistic and they're there for the consumers. And I'm just, from my personal opinion, not buying that. We've seen a lot of call for resumes for ad network tech folks from Apple. I think that essentially what they're doing is building out their own ad network for iOS devices. What they're realizing is that they're giving tons of money away to Facebook, tons of money away to Google, who make a lot of money off of ad revenue. Apple's going to take a slice of that. That's just kind of my prediction for how they're kind of heading and why they're doing this, because they did this and they shoved it through. It was not an easy, kind of like gentle sort of implication. I think they announced it in July and it took effect in like February. So it's been pretty quick that they've done this and forced the entire industry to kind of react to, let's call it their lead. Some of the things, for Google campaigns is, and this letter, number 8 is pretty important. And I know that I think Tyler even mentioned just kind of like domain verification, but part of these 8 is understanding that, if you have an app, only having 8 campaigns, this is just the limit number that you can actually kind of track for that. Again, the SCAD network is something that you should be having. You can use it if Google Analytics for Firebase in your apps, and then migrating your apps campaigns off of ROAS to CPA as a way to kind of get better tracking. Also, just making sure that when you are putting Google Analytics on your website, you are using kind of, a floodlight tag or Google Tag Manager and deploying a conversion linker. Those will help. Also making sure that you've checked arbitrary URL parameters when you set up your conversion, and then enabling audience expansion and targeting expansion on remarketing and customer match campaigns. Those are items that will help kind of get you better data for your Google campaigns. When it comes to Facebook campaigns, and Facebook has definitely been hurt more ways than this, just because I think, here again, they're taking a lot of revenue off of from Apple, or at least the way they see it as from Apple. But the important thing here is that really, and this may not be practical, is capturing emails whenever possible. Because if you have an email, you can essentially hash that and upload it to Facebook. They'll be able to take that hashed email and match it with all their other data. This allows for better targeting or retargeting of your ads. The other way here is that, and we've used this in our server-side tracking implementation, is using either Facebook SDK on your apps or using their conversion API on server-side. This allows us to capture those conversions. It also allows us to do better tracking. And this is the verification domain process. And I know, Tyler, you mentioned that this is a beast. I believe we do have a document that we can send along with the deck after this that kind of walks through the steps for domain verification, and maybe that might help streamline or simplify some of that work. But it's important to verify your domain with Facebook. And it's also making sure that you have only 8 pixel events on a domain. The important thing here, and here in the bottom I've got listed here, is that if you're operating internationally and you have your domain / for France or / for the UK, you can have only 8 total events. But if you have something that is here above, example.com, example.de for Germany, example.ca for Canada, you can have 8 events per each one of those domains. That's the top level domains. These are just domains with subdirectories. So it's more advantageous to have separate domains or even subdomains. So in other words, you could have germany.example.com or canada.example.com and be able to have separate events for each. Why they chose 8, I'm not sure. Is there any questions? I went a lot of the technical stuff, a lot of covered information there on iOS 14. I'm going to kind of dive into data privacy next, which is what's really kind of driving a lot of these changes that we're seeing across the landscape.
Yeah, I have a quick question. I don't know if now's the right time to ask or ask later, but you're mentioning Facebook SDK and how that helps. I'm curious because we're setting all this stuff up right now. So we have our Pixel. We actually have it in the front. We don't have it in the back, like you mentioned, but we're using Facebook SDK and the API. And we're going to connect that with our Stripe API to try to solve that conversion piece. Does that bring us back to we're all good, or are we still missing out on a ton?
It's better than not doing it. It's definitely how we're using kind of to track those conversions, and it is giving us a better ability. Moving to the back end versus the front end also gives you the better control of the cookie. So understanding and being able to elongate that kind of cookie window. Because I can set a server cookie from the back end, I can get beyond. I can have a 30-day cookie or something like that versus that 7 or 24-hour. The SDK, the Facebook SDK, is something we're definitely employing, through our analytics implementations in order to address this. So you're heading in the right direction. I think there's probably still a couple of other steps you can take to improve your tracking. There's nothing right now that is getting us back to pre-iOS 14 kind of tracking. That is basically been pushed out for iOS devices. Here again, why folks are like going, Apple, you just made life too difficult. I'm going to target Android.
Got it. So your main recommendation is to set our cookies to the back end. Is there anything else we can do on top of that?
Side note on the benefits of server-side tracking is that, with Google's new kind of vital core implementation of how, speed is very, very important to your ranking in the search engines, moving all of your kind of cookie setting and pixel setting to the back end also improves your speed quite a bit. So you have less things that are showing up. So all of your stuff, mobile, desktop, loads faster, improves your ranking. So there's a lot of motivation to be moving in that direction.
Awesome. All right, cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, moving into data privacy. So data privacy is really kind of what's kind of going up here. And it's really what is pushing all of these changes that we are seeing, is that giving consumers that voice in what's going on with their data. And really we, up until GDPR in 2016, nobody really had. And it's pretty easy. You just, you can see the opt-in rate for iOS 14, where it's blatantly in your face, hey, we're tracking you, that we've had a very, very low opt-in rate, that folks don't want to be tracked. And so, what we're saying here is that it's really looked at as an opportunity for brands to build trust with their customers. We have a saying here at Red Door, don't be creepy. And it's a lot about data. Don't be creepy with your data. They're the folks that are ruining it for us. They're the ones that have done creepy stuff, and they're not transparent. They're not saying what they're doing with their data. So, all of those things of being transparent, giving consumers rights, building that trust with them allows us to go, hey, would you share your data with me? I will give you this. So that value exchange is what we're really kind of building when it comes to data privacy. And getting on board of that and doing it right now is going to lay the tracks for further success down the road. As data privacy not only is just going state by state, but it's will eventually get to the federal level, because nobody's going to want to do a mishmash of 50 different state rules in order to implement data privacy. That's just not going to work. We do have multiple other state legislators very close to doing things similar to California, but no one's quite where California is. And California, quite honestly, is leading the charge in the United States for data privacy. So looking at GDPR, this is kind of what set things off for how people looked at privacy, and especially at the time, considered quite onerous, just because there's so much involved. So it is enacted in 2016. It became effective in 2018, and it affects European Union citizens for companies that process personal data. So there's really not that much limitation. You process personal data, which could be as simple as an email, name, and address on a form. That's personal data, and that means that you are susceptible to GDPR for somebody who is a European Union citizen. It doesn't mean they have to be sitting in the EU. They can be in California from the EU and still using their information. They're still an EU citizen, and still GDPR complies to them. So the main impacts, and there's quite a few of them, is tracking consent. They have to consent. It's why you now see this almost ubiquitous across the web is, hey, we're going to have cookies. Yes, we're going to track you. And they couch it in all types of different sort of ways. But the idea here really, and the recommendation is transparency, and just giving them an understanding of what's going on. Making sure that your privacy policy or updates. Data security is also behind all of this. And I know everybody cringes when I say this, but data kind of breaches are not an if, they're a when. That's a scary thought, because we just have and you see this all the time with people getting hacked now, and they're getting ransomware because they're basically locking down their data so nobody can get it. All of those things are happening, and they're very big targets. But eventually that will work its way down to almost everybody. So making sure that you have good data, making sure that good security, making sure that you're obscuring your data and nothing's kind of open and free text. All good security. It's a single bullet point here, but there's a lot that goes behind that.
And I'll throw in a shameless plug for our breakfast 2 months ago was about cybersecurity, which we do have a recording of on our YouTube channel. Go ahead.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a whole topic by itself, obviously. The idea of appointing a data protection officer, this is somebody who's kind of in charge of all of that stuff. There's also the point, and this is really kind of a cheeky thing here for the GDPR, is that they will also require a representative in the EU so that you can actually, if you have problems, communicate with them. It just seems like a bit of a money-making venture here for GDPR. And then the rest of these really are the consumer's rights. I can request to get an export of all the data you have of me. I can request to correct data that you have wrong. I can request you delete the data you have on me. I can request that you quit processing. You can keep my data, but quit processing, quit sharing, quit using for personalization, or I can just object to processing. And then of course there's fines for not complying. There have been a lot of recent cases where folks have just going to obscure the fact that they are tracking and making it just really, really bad, and they are starting to get fined. What the first kind of surveys that are coming out of GDPR, that people that were doing this and how it was affecting businesses, that the folks that were transparent up front were finding no real differentiation in opt-in rates or opt-out rates. Now, like I said, we've seen difference with iOS 14, but GDPR has been a little bit more successful in the EU. And it comes back to that building of trust. If you're transparent and you're building trust and you're telling your consumers that you find their data valuable, because we do, then they're going to opt in, because nobody wants to, be in about sports and yet find ads for knitting. That's just not compatible, right? So add good ads and data gives relevant ads to our consumers. Now, this is the US's answer, and of course, California's answer was CCPA. This was passed by the legislature. It was passed in 2018, took effect in 2020. There are limitations as to who has to do that. If you have gross revenues greater than 25 million, you buy or sell PII, personally identifiable information of 50,000 consumers, or 50% of your revenue is greater is from selling data, then you have to comply with CCPA. If you don't meet those criteria, or you are a not-for-profit, you do not need to comply with CCPA. So that is, good in the sense that you're not motivated to move. But even, for folks who are fairly large not-for-profits, we've done CCA compliance work for them, because they understand this idea of building trust with consumers, being transparent, getting them trust, letting them know you're not creepy. Those are reasons why we still suggest, getting and being compliant with these data for privacy acts. So here again, most of the things with the CCPA was, updating your privacy policy, making sure you keep your data secure. It's reasonable security, which is a kind of a nebulous definition, but I've had a lawyer explain this to me, and it's essentially, are you doing the right things? Are you not doing dumb things? Are you doing just reasonable stuff? That is how you'll be judged. And the rights that the consumer has, I could request a copy of the data. I could request that you delete it. And then also the big point that CCPA was, do not sell my information. That was where kind of we landed on the Privacy Act, is don't take my information, then make money off of it. I want the ability to say, don't do that. And that was kind of the leading edge of CCPA, of what they were kind of being able to do, because that's where they saw a lot. I mean, we had clients whose marketers weren't even aware that the information they collected on folks who submitted a lead were getting sold. So it's not just because you didn't know what's happening, it still could be happening at your company. And the other thing is that they set compliance fines. In the last November's election, there was on the ballot a new one called California Privacy Rights Act, or CPRA. So it did pass in November, and it will be in effect 2023. So this was more, from the people, for the people sort of passing, not by legislators. And this really ups the ante for CCPA, because it is an extension of CCPA. And really what they did is they had, more privacy policy updates. And where this is more GDPR, do not track. This means that I'm coming on your website, I'd say, hey, we're going to set some cookies, we're going to track your behavior, because that's how we do things like personalization and stuff, and we have to actually get permission to do that. They've expanded the data categories. They've also set a retention limit. They've also have kind of some vague understanding of what you can and cannot do with profiling. It's kind of a little undefined, and they increased the compliance fines. So kind of going in, because I get asked this a lot, CCPA versus CPRA, is that, they've expanded the sensitive data to any of this information is now considered sensitive data, and then kind of the selling versus sharing and tracking. And this is where you do not track capabilities for the CPRA, is that before it was just, hey, do not sell my information, and yes or no. It's like, well, that's kind of simple. I don't want my information sold. I'm giving it to you. I'm not giving it for you to make money off of it. Or now I just can't track. So I can't understand where you went in my website, what you viewed. I don't understand if you're an educated visitor that's ready for a purchase. All of those things are going to be limiting. So here again, coming back to this theme, I'm kind of beating a dead horse of, if you get trust with your consumers, they will opt in because they want relevant information, even for personalization on your own website. And
if you put, can we track and share, the same thing that iOS does, that'll be creepy.
Right. That's it. Just automatically comes straight forward. It's like, hey, we share your data with Google to provide relevant ads. We, do share your platform with Salesforce so that we can, track your lead and make sure we're staying up with you and tracking our phone calls and our visits because you're buying a house with me. Or, we share it with a third party, but just giving them reasonable, transparent explanations builds that trust. Hey, you're not doing it. And I'm using the word share versus sell. And, because that's definitely a different kind of animal. I've not had the conversation with anybody who's selling and kind of substantiating that with me, but I know for a fact one of our clients was doing that. It's pretty easy that as soon as you buy a house, all of a sudden you get flooded with mail. It's the same sort of situation. You make big transactions and that data gets sold. Mm-hmm. Data retention, there was no kind of retention limit before, and now there is. And they are saying longer than reasonably necessary. Some of the bigger firms like Google now putting basically a 2-year limit on when you should hold data. And that's a reasonable amount. After 2 years, your data is essentially getting stale. You have no idea what's happened to somebody in 2 years, whether their address, phone number, or even email are even relevant at this point. Profiling here, this is something that, will get probably more well-defined in the next 2 years as we work our way, well, year and a few months to 2023. It's this January 2023 this gets enacted, is that they will get a little bit more information of understanding of profiling. This is the one that I'm following actually quite closely, because one of the ways that we're kind of getting away and talking to brands about how do we address this is the implementation of what's called a CDP, which is a customer data platform. The reason that this is important is that instead of having your audiences defined by Facebook or Google, is that you start storing all your customer data into a single platform. This allows you to own your audience. This is the way that we are pushing and showing brands that this is the future of kind of marketing, is owning your audience and not just allowing our audiences to be captured by Facebook or Google, but actually getting all that information so that my personalization, my retargeting, I've got my audience, I know them, I know who they are, and my customers are trusting me to keep that data safe. That's kind of where things are going and how we're looking at it as the kind of like end solution to this. Google was going to, and I've heard you guys, I'm sure you guys have heard of the cookie apocalypse that's coming at us. They were going to get rid of third-party cookies in 2022. They pushed it off a year because they cannot get together a framework that allows us to do tracking on the Chrome or Android side. They pushed out a couple of frameworks and everybody's just kind of like shaking their head and said no. And so that's a problem for Google because 70% of the revenue comes from their ad business. So they're giving themselves another year to kind of work that out, find a way to kind of track somebody to make their advertising it's still relevant. And I think I've covered kind of fines there. So I think that's everything I've had to talk to you about today. And I'm happy to entertain questions on any of the subjects I bought, including CDPs or cookie apocalypse.
When you mentioned the back-end server cookies or the server
side tracking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is that, if you don't have that, does it, the net result, is it just more first-time users? I mean, it's not going to change the amount of traffic your website sees. It just sees it more as first-time users, a lot more first-time users and less.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely has the impact that, you know, because I can't, you know, get around some of these rules put by things like, you know, even, you know, other browsers, which are much lower percentage. Of course, the, you know, the big browser percentage is Chrome, you know, then Microsoft's Edge, and, you know, then Safari is down the road. And yes, it doesn't allow me to get around, you know, kind of my Firefox and my Apple sort of browsers to, you know, set a server cookie and get beyond that either 24-hour, 7-day limit. So yes, that's definitely one of the impact, but it, you know, there's more security in setting things on the server side. So the IT folks are a little bit happier. There's, you know, also the speed stuff, meeting Google's Core Vitals initiative. So there's lots of advantages to that. And, you know, we're basically slammed in doing these projects for clients right now, because it is so beneficial. So yes, you can get away without it, but I would make it part of your marketing plan in the near future.
Also stuff